All right, let's just jump right in. Today, we're diving into an explainer on one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in true crime history, the 1922 Hinterkaifeck murders. We're looking at a case that is honestly just as much a psychological thriller as it is a tragedy. This story has fascinated and completely horrified people for over a century. And it's not just because of what actually happened on that remote Bavarian farmstead, but because of the deeply unsettling, almost unbelievable events that led up to it. Now, to truly grasp the sheer dread of this case, you have to put yourself in the shoes of Andreas Gruber. He was the 63-year-old patriarch of the family. Imagine this. In the days before the murders, he steps outside and finds fresh tracks in the snow. They lead straight out of the dense surrounding Bavarian forest directly to his isolated farm. But as he follows them, he realizes something absolutely terrifying. There are no tracks leading away. None. Someone had walked right onto his property and simply stayed. Part 1. The warning signs. So the paranoia at this farmstead didn't just happen overnight. It escalated rapidly over months. It started weirdly enough. An unfamiliar newspaper from Munich just appears out of nowhere. Nobody in the region even subscribed to it. Then a set of house keys mysteriously vanishes. Gone. Following that, Andreas starts hearing phantom, rhythmic footsteps coming from the attic right above them. He goes up, searches the whole place. Nothing. And then, finally, just days before the actual event, he finds those footprints in the snow we just talked about, leading straight to a broken lock in the machine room. But you know what's really terrifying here? The family's previous maid, Crescence Rieger, actually abandoned her paying job on that isolated farm 6 months earlier. Why? Because she was utterly convinced that someone or something was already living up above them. She was so rattled by the strange noises coming from the attic that she literally just packed her bags and left. She practically ran. Which brings us to part 2, the night of March 31st. The methodical nature of this killer is frankly chilling. This wasn't some frenzied, chaotic attack in the middle of the night. No, it was calculated. The killer somehow managed to lure 4 family members out into the barn, one by one. You have Andreas, his 72-year-old wife Kazilia, their 35-year-old widowed daughter Victoria, and 7-year-old Kazilia. After murdering them and stacking their bodies under the hay, the killer didn't stop. They walked right into the farmhouse and killed the sleeping 2-year-old toddler Yosef and the brand new maid right in their beds. And we have to talk about the sheer brutality of this. The weapon was a mattock, a heavy pickaxe-like farm tool. And the twisted part? It actually belonged to Andreas Gruber himself. It was designed for slaughtering cattle. The victims suffered horrendous blunt force trauma. To put that into perspective, autopsy evidence showed that 7-year-old Kazilia actually survived for hours in the hay. It's heartbreaking, but in her final moments, she was found to have torn out tufts of her own hair. Moving on to part 3, the 3-day shadow. Now, you'd probably expect a perpetrator to flee the scene of such a gruesome crime immediately, right? Especially after murdering 6 people. You get as far away as possible. But the evidence shows us they did the exact opposite. They didn't run. They stayed. Incredibly, the murderer hung around the farm for up to 4 days. Neighbors actually saw smoke rising from the chimney over the weekend. The perpetrator just casually cooked meals, ate the entire supply of bread, tended to the livestock, and lived alongside the 6 bodies like absolutely nothing had happened. It's surreal. At one point, a mechanic passing by in the dark was even blinded by a lantern held by an unseen figure at the edge of the property, just standing there. Part 4. A botched investigation. So the police eventually get involved, and over 100 suspects were questioned in this case. But finding any solid physical evidence, it was almost impossible. And the reason why is mind-boggling. Dozens of curious locals completely trampled the crime scene. They moved the bodies in the barn, they wandered through the house, and I can't even believe this, some of them actually cooked and ate meals in the victim's kitchen before the police could properly secure the area. It was a total circus. You have to remember, forensic standards in 1922 were basically non-existent. The court physician literally performed the autopsies on makeshift tables right there in the barn hay. And then it gets weirder. The police actually decapitated the victims so they could send their skulls to psychics and clairvoyants in Munich, hoping for supernatural clues. Those skulls, tragically, were lost during the chaos of World War II. Finally, less than a year later, the farm was completely demolished, and it was only during this teardown that they finally found the murder weapon, the hidden mattock, concealed under a false floor in the attic. Let's get into part 5. Suspects and theories. Without taking any sides here, we can see how the theories on the killer's identity range wildly. First up, you have Lawrence Schlittenbauer. He was a neighbor locked in a bitter paternity dispute over the toddler Joseph. He actually led the search party, broke into the barn, and then suspiciously unlocked the house door with a key he somehow already had, going in all by himself. But he always maintained his innocence. Then there's the incredibly dark theory of Andreas Gruber himself, a known abuser who'd actually served prison time for incest with his daughter Victoria. Some thought maybe it was a violent murder-suicide rage, but he was found slain by the same Matic. Third, there's Carl Gabriel, Victoria's supposedly dead husband from World War I. Rumors swirled that he survived and came back for revenge. And finally, Paul Mueller, a drifter that some modern authors link to a string of unsolved axe murders across the US and Germany. It's a real puzzle. It is also super important to look at the local gossip at the time. Remember the former maid Crescenz Rieger? Well, she pointed fingers directly at local farmhands, specifically the Bickler brothers. One of them allegedly muttered that the family ought to be dead. This just perfectly highlights how thick the air of suspicion, local grudges, and rural paranoia was in this tight-knit Bavarian community. Everyone was a suspect to someone. Now, the police pretty quickly had to abandon the whole robbery theory, because despite how isolated the farm was, large amounts of cash and valuables were left completely untouched inside the house. I mean, think about it. A thief doesn't slaughter a whole family, leave the money sitting right there on the table, and then stick around for 4 days to feed the cows. It makes no sense. This heavily pointed to someone acting out of a deep personal hatred, someone with intimate knowledge of the farm's layout, or honestly, just utter madness. And that brings us to our final section, Part 6, the enduring silence. This investigation dragged on for decades. Decades. It was officially closed in 1955, but get this, the very last person of interest was questioned as late as 1986. But here is the most fascinating part. In 2007, modern police academy students in Germany reviewed all the old files using contemporary forensic analysis. They reportedly actually identified the most likely killer, but they kept the name a secret out of respect for living descendants. So that leaves the public exactly where they started in 1922, in the dark. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think back to those missing keys, the random newspaper, those phantom, rhythmic footsteps echoing in the attic. The true horror of Hinterkaifeck isn't just the sheer brutality of their murders themselves, it's the profound, terrifying invasion of sanctuary. It really makes you ask yourself, what if the monsters aren't hiding out there in the woods, but are already waiting patiently inside your own home? Keep that in the back of your mind, stay curious, and thank you so much for joining me as we unraveled this historic nightmare.